So, welcome to Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery. Today's talk is on a peace treaty and beginning anew. So, in any relationship, conflict arises, whether it's a spiritual community, a farm, a workplace, a relationship, a family. Conflict, misunderstandings arise. It's a very human thing. And it's really important in a healthy relationship, to know how to have a rupture, which is inevitable almost because people aren't the same, but also how to mend that so that it doesn't become irreconcilable. How can you work through your misunderstandings in a kind and civilized way and come to a compromise or an understanding? And sometimes you just realize we're too different, or that the person involved doesn't have enough self-awareness, and good intentions, so you can't work with them, and it's better to have some space. But sometimes, you would hope in a spiritual community or in a friendship where your friend is self-aware that you can work through rupture and come to a place of peace, a place of understanding and respect. And even if you come to a place where you realize, actually, we need to go our separate ways, we can do it with as little collateral damage as possible, especially in the case of parents, in a divorce. That's really important, or with an aging parent, and siblings fighting. That's something I've been dealing with recently. So I thought I'd revisit, these teachings on beginning anew and working through conflict in a Buddhist way. So there is a peace treaty, and it's in a book called Anger Cooling the Flames by Thich Nhat Hanhs. And it's something that people would sign, when they enter a spiritual community or have a marriage. The peace treaty basically outlines, it says, we, these two people or this community, being aware that our love and our relationship is really important, agree to, when we have a conflict, when we're angry, to not pretend we're not angry, to not be verbally abusive, to agree to have a meeting, to agree to not blurt it all out, but to do so in a mindful way, in a kind way, and to try and resolve the issue mindfully, and to speak not in a blaming way, but in an honest way, but in a kind way, with awareness. And the other person, who is the person who is hearing what the person who's upset has said, agrees to not interrupt, agrees to not blame, to not judge, and to listen deeply in order to understand, to help relieve the other person's suffering, and to not interrupt the person when they're speaking, to give them the full time to speak and express their feelings and not react immediately. And if at the time you've heard someone say, I'm really upset with you, to not, if you're really upset yourself, to make a time in a few days to respond, so that both parties get a chance to be heard, but not off the cuff, and to realizing that love is understanding. If we don't understand the person we claim to love, our love can be a prison. And it's possible for two people to be living together, but to become strangers, to really not understand each other, to just have a familial relationship of obligation, or just, and this is how affairs start. Affairs are complex. There could be so many reasons, and it may not be your fault at all. But, when someone is seeking a relationship outside, and you're like, how did that happen? Because they're probably going through a whole bunch of stuff, and they have a bunch of unaddressed needs, because you were living together, but you weren't, communicating what's arising for you. Because sometimes when an accumulation of misunderstandings and resentments come, it blocks the river of love. You know, it's like when a river diverts course because there's too much silt or there's too many rocks blocking the way. So a river will find a new way to flow. And that love is a, marriage is not a, how you say, it's not a permanent state. It's something that you, or any kind of relationship, it's a relationship you nourish every day with kindness and understanding and working through your issues. And it also requires you to, a healthy relationship of any kind requires you to work on yourself as well. A healthy relationship with yourself, you know, and to be honest with yourself and communicate and acknowledge what you need and what you're going through, and to work on yourself so that you're not expecting someone else to do the work on yourself that you won't. Like often people who are resistant to their emotions and pretend they don't exist or they don't have inner pain, it means the other person in the relationship has to do all the work. Like, so how are you feeling? What are you feeling? You know, identify that feeling, you know, and it's so much work for the other person, you know, when they have to almost be like the therapist for this person who refuses to acknowledge their own emotions and even ridicules the other person, or like, why are you nagging me? You know, because actually you won't do your inner work, you know. And like it's like these guys who say I'm not angry and then punch a hole in the drywall, you know. I don't have a problem. You know. Or like the woman who says I'm fine, be very, very scared when a woman says I'm fine, it's fine. Be very, very be very, very afraid. Yeah, so but sometimes we just reach a point where we can't understand each other. And it sometimes happens when with teenagers, you know, with parents and teenagers, because the teenager's trying to assert themselves and the parent can't understand and wants to keep them as a child. And the teenager has defiance, you know, it's like, F you, I reject everything about you because I'm trying to assert and create my own identity. But the parent, they become estranged because the teenager is being immature and rude, really disrespectful. But the parent is also trying to control the teenager too much and is not giving them the space, you know, to find themselves, you know, and create their own identity separate to the parent. And rather demanding respect, you know, help the teenager find the words to express what it is they're going through. Because I know when I was a teenager, I had all these big feelings and I didn't have the words. You know, my father died when I was 14 and I was in a state of suicidal depression and grief and anger, and I just didn't have the words, you know. I didn't have the words. Like people would be like, what's wrong? And I just couldn't explain, you know. Or I was, on the times that I did explain, I was judged or I was offered advice that wasn't helpful. I wasn't really heard. And yeah, so it's very important to really try. And when you listen to someone, don't listen for your chance to talk, waiting for your chance to talk, because that happens so much in the world today. Like people feel lonely or they're caught in their trauma. They repeat their story and their trauma like a record. And it gets to the point, you know, where people don't want to come around anymore because that person is so caught in their, you know, resentment or whatever. But they haven't been heard, you know. So really listening, and not just listening to what they're saying, but what they're not saying and what is underneath the words, you know, rather than being annoyed at, sometimes someone will say things that are misguided, you know. I mean, two people can see a situation in very different ways because they've led different lives, they've got different traumas, they get triggered in different ways. So, and they have different experiences. Like my experience is men and women actually have quite different experiences of ways of moving through the world. Even though gender is a spectrum, you know, people on either end of the spectrum can have very different perceptions of reality. even white people and people of color, or young people and older people. We don't always have a lot of empathy for each other, you know. So it's really important to listen in order to understand, not just waiting for your chance to talk. And and someone's perceptions can be really wrong or judgmental, but sometimes it's because they're in pain. Sometimes we lash out or we say something really stupid because we feel like we're suffering and we'll get relief by, you know. But in the end, we just damage our relationship with that person, and we are poorer as a result of that person not being in our life anymore. And this is so common these days. We have this attitude that friends are dispensable and swipe right, swipe left, there'll just be another person there in future, rather than trying to work through conflict and difference. It comes to the point where people create a civil war, like what could happen in America. The views are so polarized, and people have stopped talking to each other and humanizing each other, because when you humanize someone, when you really understand and listen to them, and they're in front of you, you may not agree with them, you may condemn what they've done, you may know that it's not a good person to have in your life, but you can't hate them, because there is understanding there. You understand why they are and how they have become the way they've become. Like narcissism. Narcissism is also a very popular pop psychology term. Like a lot of the people, I know people that say anyone they don't agree with, that doesn't agree with them is a narcissist. But actually a narcissist is a very specific diagnosis. But it's actually a really sad diagnosis, because a narcissist is a child whose parents didn't really love them and only loved them and validated them when they were perfect. So the way that child developed was to become a really harsh judge and to just kind of lock up, to create a grandiose self, because who they were was never enough for their parents, and it's a very hard diagnosis to help and change and reverse, so if someone is really a narcissist, it's actually a severe trauma response, and it can be damaging. Like narcissistic abuse can be a really hard thing to deal with, but the person who is a narcissist is an object of compassion, because it's a trauma response to a lack of love in childhood. But just because someone doesn't agree with you or has some disagreeable qualities doesn't mean they're a narcissist. And just because someone doesn't validate who you think you are doesn't mean they're toxic and should be immediately thrown out of your life. No, I'm not saying people should stay with someone who's abusive or put up with being treated badly. I'm just saying we're all so lonely because we don't know how to, and we're also I'm not talking about people in rural Tasmania, they tend to have more time, but I'm talking about people in mainstream lives. Like they do tend to be time poor and have less money, and so they just want a friend who's everything, and they want their partner to be everything. Like, you need to be my best friend, you need to be my soulmate. Whereas in the past it was a village. You got some advice from the older, wiser, more experienced person. You had your friends, your peers, the people your own age. Then you had the people you worked with, the craftsmen. You had a whole bunch of people that would support you socially, and it was much more inclusive. Like even the village odd person, everybody would say hi. They'd go through the village and they'd be tolerated, as long as they didn't hurt anyone. They'd be tolerated, and people would say hi, how are you, and check in on them. People didn't have to be incredibly charismatic to find friends. Whereas these days, because people are time poor, they tend to ignore people that aren't immediately appealing. So that means anyone, like if someone's on the spectrum, or someone's just wasn't socialized well, they tend to be more marginalized now. And it's a shame. It's a shame that we can't all make some space for each other. We're all poorer as a result. Especially children and older people really need and people with disabilities really need the support of the community and appreciate kindness, not patronizing, but respectful support, respectful kindness, and just acknowledgement. Even I've had mothers, who are staying home and everybody else is at work, say they're so lonely and they just wish, somebody would say hi. Like that motherhood was a lonely thing in the city, but it's actually a really important job for the community, the next generation. So anyway, yeah. So maybe we'll start with beginning anew. So in a monastery, now is the beginning of the rains retreat where monks and nuns would stay. In Asia, it's the 3 months of rain. So monks and nuns would stay inside the monastery and not go out, because if they walk in the fields, all the worms are out and they'll damage them. They'll damage the crops, the seedlings coming up. And it's a time for them to intensify their practice of meditation. Whereas the other parts of the year, they might be wandering to teach people, and they might go out into the community to do social work or something. But at the end of the rains retreat, in a monastery, you're living with someone that you wouldn't have chosen to live with in normal life. But it's just because you both happen to be monks or nuns, So it can be hard. And after 3 months, tensions will have built up. So at the end of that 3 months retreat, you have this ceremony where you go, if I've done anything that offended you or harmed you, please forgive me. And it's a mutual, forgiveness thing. And they call it putting straw on mud, because mud is, unpleasant, right? So they put straw and hay on top so that people can walk over it, right? So it's like the mending of the monastic relationship, And in a monastery, when there was conflict, which inevitably there is, I don't know why lay people expect monks and nuns to just get on when lay people have a 50% divorce rate. It's like, well, you have a 50% divorce rate, so what do you think of us? And yeah, so like if the monk and if the monastics couldn't solve the problem together, they would involve a third party, someone senior that they both respect, who would listen to both sides. And then if it became even bigger, they might involve the whole community, and everybody would listen to what happened, and then there would be a discussion, and then the community would make a decision, and the monastics involved had to accept it, and not keep bringing it up again and again. Like in the time of the Buddha, there was this one monk who broke a minor vow, and the monk in charge of vows said, you broke this vow, you shouldn't do that. And then the monk who did that was like, it doesn't matter, I didn't really do it. And it became this huge thing. Like some people were on the side of the vow keeping monk, and some were on the side of the monk he was like the chant master or something, and there was this huge fight and a big split in the community. And, finally the Buddha was like, you need to get over this. And they were like, no, we'll solve it on our own. You go away and be peaceful. And finally, in the end, a decision was made. And the monk who broke the vow admitted he did it and apologized. And the monk who pointed it out was like, sorry, I was so zealous about it. And sorry if I created acrimony. But that's how it developed, this. So in some monasteries, they'll gather together in Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanhs monastery, they'll gather together every 2 or 3 weeks to have a beginning anew ceremony, so that these resentments, just like in a family, and if like, so for example, if sometimes you don't know, like, oh, my snoring is really keeping my roommates awake, or the way I always put my cup down without cup holder and I leave rings everywhere, that really drives people crazy. Or you don't know what's driving the other person crazy, and that can start to resent you, and you don't even know, you're not even aware, right? So if there is a chance to sit down and speak about, or when you said this, I got offended, and it's like, oh, that wasn't my intention. You can become more aware, and you when there is more understanding and loving kindness and forgiveness, it's like a bit of lubrication, social lubrication, to make life more smooth. You know, because being in a monastery or a community is like a bunch of rocks in a one of those tumblers that makes them all smooth. The rocks are either gonna break or they're gonna get smooth. So hopefully they get smooth. Yeah, so there's 4 points to beginning anew. The first one is watering the good qualities, watering the flowers, we say. Because we don't just go in and say, you know, what you did was really shit and I hate you and get out of here. You're not gonna get a good response. You sandwich it. You say something good and what you appreciate about them and what you've noticed, how they're improving or what they've changed. Like, for example, say you've got a young novice who's just getting used to monastic life, you know, and they've never lived in a community before and they're making a lot of mistakes. You know, like they reversed the car into the Buddha statue and cracked it in the garden. You know, that $1,000 granite Buddha statue from Indonesia. So when you want to talk to them about it, you say, so I see that you're always on time and you're learning the chanting really well and you're getting along with your fellow monastics really well. So I truly appreciate that. That's the flower watering, you know, and try to mean it, try to make it sincere, you know, not just fluff. And then number 2 is you express regret. Like, if there's anything that I've done that's made life harder here for you, please let me know. And then express the hurt or disagreement. So you're 28 years old and you know that our monastery doesn't have a lot of money. So can you please be a little bit more mindful when you drive the car? Because you cracked the Buddha statue and that Buddha statue was donated by my grandmother and it was $5,000. So, you know, that's not great for us. So I know you did it because you were in a rush and you were trying to help someone get to the dentist, but please be more mindful because be more mindful of the monastery's property, as you even more mindful than you would be of your own possessions, because our resources are so finite. And as a monastic, you have to be a little bit more aware. And if you know that you're running low on time, maybe you need to arrive earlier, you know, something like that. Or, you know, say you've got the husband or the wife who won't admit their feelings. Like, so I noticed that you were driving in a really aggressive way and it made me feel a bit afraid. And you kept saying that you weren't angry, but I could tell from the way that you were chopping wood and driving that you were angry. And that's not safe for me or the kids. So can we talk about your feelings? You know, and, you know, talking about your feelings is just good mental health. It's not emasculating, you know. There's so many things that we need to talk about, you know, that just arise. Yeah. And that sometimes you'll need to make a compromise because you just can't, you don't want the same thing because you're not the same people, but there has to be a compromise. Like, say you've got Asian monastics who like really spicy food, and then you've got Western monastics who can't eat spicy food. So there has to be a side dish, or there has to be a rotation of like what food is available. Like I lived in a monastery where the Vietnamese monastics would tell us, the Westerners, you should just accept whatever you have without attachment. But if you made a meal without rice, they would lose their minds. So sometimes people can't see their own bias as well. So first point is flower watering. Second point is expressing regret, like self-awareness of yourself, anything you might have done wrong or unskillfully. Third point is expressing hurt or disagreement, but just focusing on, I feel I need, maybe not I need, but this would be good for me, not in a blaming way. Like, you know, you did this and it's all your fault. More like, when you did this, I felt this way. And I don't know if that's how you meant it, but that's how it impacted me. And then the fourth point is to ask for more information. Like, is there, because you don't know what people are going through, there is there something that you're going through that made you back into the Buddha? Do you feel overwhelmed with the amount of tasks that you have? um I don't know, do you it might be really patronizing to say, do you need glasses? So maybe not that. It's really funny though, because there was one older monastic one time, and they couldn't hear anyone. Like, they were just like, huh? And everybody was like, come on, like they were just really getting frustrated with them, like, you know like, you need to hear us. And so in the end, she got tested and she needed hearing aids, but she hated them. She was like, my life was so peaceful, now I can hear everyone asking me to do things. So
Probably got little buttons.
yeah. So sometimes she would just, take them out. And she'd be like, but she had her hearing aid out. She's like, I'm a better nun when my hearing aid's out. But sometimes it's an act of compassion. Yeah. So beginning anew is not just for relationships, it's also to change your mind and heart and transform the ignorance that brings wrong actions of body, speech, and mind. And even in Tibetan Buddhism, we have this practice of purification at the end of the day, where we reflect if we did anything unwholesome, and then we try to not commit it again, and we say a mantra of purification. And that way, shame and guilt disappear, and there is more joy in being alive. So this beginning anew could be done once a week in a family, or once a month. You just sit down in a circle on a Friday night, you put some flowers in the center of the circle, and you just follow your breath for a while. And then people are, opened and invited to say what's going on for them, And I've seen some really transformative things, rather than people. You just have to be really, you don't want to trauma dump or blame. And there has to be, if there's only one person who's always sharing and making their feelings everybody else's responsibility, that can be problematic. So people, to do this practice, there needs to be trust, there needs to be self-awareness, and you don't want to be in a situation where it's like really passive aggressive, like the way, like corporate mindfulness programs that basically just make the employee work harder. Like, well, we gave you this mindfulness course, so why aren't you able to meet your productivity targets? It's like passive aggressive. There's no goodwill in that. It's just to squeeze the. So this nonviolent communication and beginning anew, it could be used in a situation where one person has more power over another. Could be misused. So you've got to really, people really need to have goodwill and want to change and respect each other for this to really work. Because sometimes when people express anger, it's healthy and legitimate. Like when people express anger around homelessness, racism, gendercide, all of these things are legitimate, and it's. I mean, I'm not saying people should smash things or be violent or abusive, but just telling someone, you shouldn't be angry that the monks sit up on the throne and you're just, the nun cleaning in the kitchen and the toilet and the bathroom, because that's your karma as a woman. And expressing anger is just a sign of your failure as a Buddhist practitioner to master your negative emotions. And anger is a really negative emotion, so we'd really appreciate it if you could just tone that down a little bit. Like that could be how this could be misused, right? So we don't want to have that. So there's times where someone expressing their pain and anger itself is not, it's something you want to acknowledge, transform, and move beyond. It's not something you want to have all the time. But there are times where it's appropriate and healthy for someone to express their experience of oppression. But anyway, yeah. So you can express regrets for thoughtless actions that you may have hurt others. And sometimes, when people are so attuned, like I've seen couples who have both committed to mindfulness, and, the husband will just tap the wife's shoulder, and she'll be like, I did that thing again, didn't I? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, sorry. and that's it. It's done. Because they're so attuned, and they're so there's no need to have a beginning a new ceremony, because they realized and they apologized and they began anew, you know. So speaking honestly but not destructively, listening with a willingness to relieve the suffering of the other person, and replying a few days later. So also sometimes someone's words can be really hard to hear. You know, it can be hard. Sometimes people have a lot of misconceptions about us and our intentions. That's happened to me. You know, I'm a bit outspoken. I'm a bit of an acquired taste sometimes, and people can really misconstrue my intentions and my actions just because I'm speaking out about. It's like a very common trope, right? She's speaking about gendered violence, so she must hate men. But one doesn't necessarily mean the other, you know? So, it's good to always clear the air and clarify, you know. But if you are very triggered by what the other person is saying, it's a good idea to discuss your side of things the next day, you know, or in writing, you know. But sometimes in writing, I find it can be, like, especially text messages, can be a really bad way to have a relationship, because you can't see someone's face, you can't see the impact you're having, you know. And, you know, like disagreements on Facebook, you know, oh my God, like you'll drop a friend, you'll meet someone the same day, you'll make them a friend, you'll like all their posts, you'll have a disagreement, unfriend them, block them, one day friendship, right? And it's like people get so triggered, and myself included. But actually social media is trying to keep you engaged, so it will try to trigger you, doesn't care about your well-being, just wants you to get enraged and get involved, you know, and watch the commercials and the feed and the dopamine feed. So you're being manipulated. You know, sometimes it's just like, just keep scrolling, you know, just walk on, not my monkeys, not my circus. And it's very one-dimensional, you know, like it's like the top of the iceberg. Like someone might look like a real moron on social media, but you just don't know what's underneath. I found that a lot with some men who post really toxic things about women. They're usually in a lot of pain, and they can't find a partner, and they've got some psychological trauma. And, you know, I've seen women who are very bitter as well. So just remember, on social media, you can only see the top of the iceberg. What's going on underneath is very different. So then, this is Beginning Anew. And as part of Beginning Anew, there is the Peace Treaty, which you can Google online, like just Google Thich Nhat Hanhs Peace Treaty. But just to, summarize it, you're committing to recognize at times that you're not mindful or skillful, and see how you've hurt the other person, even how we hurt ourselves as well. Maybe we're aware that we have the habit energy of getting angry, and acknowledge and reflect on what we may have done. And acknowledging, you know, the seed of anger or negative emotions is there in us. And that can sometimes be the main cause of our suffering. You know, the other person just tripped it, but the minefield is our responsibility. And, you know, sometimes the main cause of our suffering is our own delusion. And also, you know, the other person is suffering also, and therefore may behave unskillfully, and they watered, you know, your seeds, or their suffering boiled over onto you. So a person who suffers seeks relief, and sometimes they seem to be destroying us, but it's because they suffer greatly and they want relief. And maybe they were never taught to relate well. Maybe they didn't have a good paradigm. Not everybody starts life at the same point. You know, some people are starting the race of life way, way behind. You know, some people don't even have any metaphorical shoes on the racetrack of life. Especially if it's a marriage, if it's a family. Happiness isn't just a personal matter. Happiness is a communal matter, because your partner's well-being, Your parents' well-being will impact your well-being, and the well-being of people in your community impacts you. Like, I really hate the fact that I have to walk through the city and see encampments of tents or homeless people, you know, who have nowhere to go. Like, it's just unthinkable in a country as rich as Australia that we would have homeless people, or that the unemployment rate is not enough to live on. You know, when you have untaxed billionaires and corporations with offshore accounts, there's always money for a submarine or a statue of some, you know, white supremacist, but there's never enough money for housing the poor and feeding the hungry. Yeah, so like during COVID, when the poor became a threat to the rich, suddenly they found housing. Suddenly, all these people were housed because they could offer COVID to the rich, right? So it just shows you how things are prioritized, you know, which is really sad. Yeah. So happiness, yeah, is a communal matter. So deeply reflect and seek a way to help the person. You know, and if we see that it's our fault, apologize immediately. We don't need to wait for a Friday meeting. And if you're not calm, if you're overwhelmed, ask for more time. Because sometimes things can, like, we can be snappy with our friend or our partner because our work is going badly. We hate our boss. So it's like a, what do you call it? Like a waterfall effect or something. Like a one thing flows on from another, and everything goes badly. You know, and when you're struggling to keep your job and kind of hate your life, or you're having a nervous breakdown and your friend's like, why aren't you calling me, and I feel neglected, like, you just don't have the energy and the bandwidth to deal with them. Children are like that. They sense, even dogs, they sense some agitation, so they'll press in, lean into that, you know. And yeah, it's like everything goes bad at once. And it's like, you know, if you're calm and someone cuts you off in traffic, it's fine. But if you are going through a divorce or something bad has happened, you just want to get out and punch that person because of what else has happened. So it's you know, you're putting your anger from one thing onto another. Yeah. So if you are the one who has facilitated someone suffering, don't ridicule that person when they express their needs. You know, even if they're wrong, don't press to be right. Sit and listen to. Sometimes people can be really hard to hear. So with those kind of people, you maybe say, well, I can't sit for an hour, but I can, you know, set boundaries, like I have 15 minutes, so let's sit together and talk. Like if it's a estranged sibling, or, you know, a bitter neighbor or something, you know, you can sit with them for a limited period of time and listen. Even if yeah, and it's more important to listen than it is to be right. Yeah, and if you've written someone a note, you know, let's have a meeting, don't say, what's wrong, tell me what's wrong, tell me now. Let them tell you at the meeting in their own time. And if someone said they're not ready, don't press them. Say, yes, I will come to the meeting, and, you know, acknowledge, like, what did I say or do? Look deeply. Apologize right away if you know that you were wrong. Don't give reasons like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't see it like that. Like, that's not an apology. An apology is, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Yeah. Or, I'm very sorry, I was not mindful and understanding. You know, and you don't have to just say, I'm wrong. Like, we can say, I'm really sorry if I harmed you. And can I also have a meeting where I explain my feelings, my needs, and my point of view? You don't just have to unconditionally apologize if you know it was a mutual failing and that you also have things to discuss. But yeah, don't hog the mic. Don't just take up all the energy and make everybody, because that can happen in a community as well, that some person is the one always talking about their feelings and everybody else is like hostage hostage for the ride. Yeah. And yeah, practice, you know, mindful meditation, breathing, reflecting, so that those unskillful events become less, and you realize, like, what are the seeds? Why is this so triggering for me? It goes back to my childhood, and there, that senior monastic is just like my father figure.